afternoon, everyone. This is Councilmember Gilbert Cedillo. I'm the chair of the Housing Committee. Today is Wednesday, February 10th, 2021. We are prepared to call the roll, Madam Clerk, and I'm trusting that we do have a quorum.
Calling the roll for the Housing Committee meeting on February 10th, Councilmember Cedillo.
Still here?
Councilmember Rahman.
Here.
Thank you. Councilmember Harris Dawson is currently not present. Councilmember Krikorian.
Here.
And Councilmember Lee is also not present. 3 members present. You have a quorum, Mr. Chair.
Great. Let's go forward. Do we go straight to public comment today?
Would you like me to read the instructions for the public comment?
I would.
Members of the public who would like to offer public comment on the items listed on the agenda should call 1-669-254-5252 and use meeting ID number 160-871-1866 and then press the number sign. Press the number sign again when prompted for participant ID. Once admitted into the meeting, press *9 to request to speak.
Okay, you should start.
Yes, Mr. Lohman, please start.
Caller with the last 4 digits, 0206. Could you press *6 to unmute yourself? State your name, the items you want to speak on.
Hi, yes, Susan Hunter. I'm calling from Los Angeles Tenants Union, and it's just general public comment.
Okay, you have 1 minute.
Thank you. Yes, I'm calling today because it's been almost 4 years to the date that we saw anti-harassment proposed in this committee. We haven't seen Rue's Ellis' motion be a report back. We haven't seen O'Farrell's motion be a report back. We haven't seen Bonin's motion be reported back. We have report backs that are supposed to be helping tenants' rights and push back on displacement that have been on the shelf for years. We have to do something about this. I mean, this 4 years for anti-harassment is insane. So I'm respectfully asking the committee to please put down some kind of a time limit or time frame that report backs and motions can be carried through so we can actually do something about displacement. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hunter.
Caller with the last 4 digits, 7006. Could you please press *6, state your name and the items you want to speak on. Caller with the last 4 numbers, 7006. Could you please press *6 to unmute yourself? State your name and the items.
All items and general comment.
You have 3 minutes, sir.
Yeah, so we have the housing problem agenda item. I don't see a housing problem, because we've solved the housing problem. We just let people build whatever they want and camp underneath freeway passes and use the bathroom by any local tree, steal water from any establishment that's still in business, and with our economy. So I noticed that they're trying to fade my goat remote, but we will continue to pursue the agenda item topics first. Now, we noted also that there's an idea of taking certain units and getting like 12 units for certain council districts. Now, of course, Gil participates, Monica participates, but the others don't, because they don't like the homeless. We love the homeless over in CD5. Just come camp wherever you want. Paul Koretz doesn't give a fucking shit. That's right. So, the rest of the council members will try to care Only Monica. She's the only one that cleans up in the valley. And Gil is the only one that does it downtown. The rest of you, broken promises, lies, and corruption. And that's why Gil Cedillo's running for mayor. So now we'll go to the general public comment portion, if I may. Yes, do I have my 2 minutes?
We have 1 minute. Comment. 1 minute.
Oh, all right. Mr. Harris Dawson apologized to Lynn Moses for that fucking TRO. All he did was bring a bunch of old grandmothers in front of your home on the sidewalk. First Amendment. Ask the law school graduate from People's College on the panel. First Amendment protected free speech. Just like what Donald Trump did on January 6th. He told them to go protest at the goddamn Capitol. He didn't tell anybody to go inside. And Lynn Moses didn't tell anybody to go inside. So just like Donald Trump, Lynn Moses was acquitted of this fucking bullshit by Hugo Rossiter. Another asshole. Fuck the city. And Gil Cedillo for mayor. And if anybody else wants to call up.
Thank you, caller. Caller with the last 4 digits, 1974. Could you please press star 6 to unmute yourself? State your name and the items you want to speak on. Caller with the last 4 digits, 1974. Could you please press star 6 to unmute yourself? State your name and the items you want to speak on. Okay. Caller with the last 4 digits, 1403. Please state your name. Press star 6 to unmute yourself. State your name and the items you want to speak on. Caller with the last 4 digits, 1403. Please press star 6 to unmute yourself. State your name and the items you want to speak on. What items do you want to speak on, sir? Caller with the last 4 digits, 4208. Could you please press star 6 to unmute yourself? State your name and the items you want to speak on. Caller with the last 4 digits, 4208. Could you please press star 6 to unmute yourself? State your name and the items you want to speak on. Caller with the last 4 digits, 1630. Could you please press star 6? State your name and the items you want to speak on. Caller with the last 4 digits, 1630. Could you please press star 6? State your name and the items you want to speak on.
Hi, this is Charlie Peppers. I'm a member of the Tenants Association for Kingswood Apartments. We're the subject of item number 2 on the agenda. I wanted to vote in favor of item number 2.
Oh, you have 2 minutes, sir. Did you want to speak just on the one item?
Just on the one item, sir.
You have 1 minute, sir.
All right, thank you. Yes, it's very important to me and a lot of that we're able to keep this building as low-income housing because of the area and the rapid gentrification. I know a lot of my neighbors who've actually become friends through the process of picketing for the right to our housing in this area struggle with finding jobs, especially now during COVID, and really aren't in the best position to find somewhere that matches the wage that they're making. So this would mean a lot to my neighbors. It would mean a lot to me, and it would also, I believe, set a precedent for District 13, which is where I live. So I really do want to vote or encourage you all to vote in favor for item number 2. Thank you.
Thank you. Caller with the last 4 digits, 0914. Could you please press star 6 to unmute yourself? State your name and the items you want to speak on. Caller with the last 4 digits 0914, could you please press star 6 to unmute yourself, state your name and the items you want to speak on. Caller with the last 4 oh, you've spoken already. Okay, Mr. Chair, that's all we have for public comment.
Mr. Chair, you're muted.
Wow. So thank you. I noticed that we have Mr. Harris Dawson has joined us. Mr. Lee has joined us. So we've got a full committee. You want to move to item number 1?
Certainly. Item number 1 is a Los Angeles Housing and Community Investment Department report and City Administrative Officer 2 report relative to authority to revise ground lease terms for 12 affordable housing developments on city-owned land.
Okay, thank you. Is the CAO ready to make a presentation on its recommendations?
Yes. Good afternoon, Chair and committee members. Emily Zan Cervantes with the Office of the City Administrative Officer. The Housing and Community Investment Department is requesting authority to amend the terms of ground leases for 12 projects previously approved by the Mayor and Council for the purpose of reducing operational costs and changing the financing structure for these projects, and therefore potentially reducing the public subsidy for these projects. Reducing the public subsidy for projects could help the city better facilitate the development of affordable housing. The specific changes to the ground lease terms include reducing the annual base rent from $10,000 per year to $1 per year, eliminating the requirement of residual receipts rent payments, and reducing the initial terms for the ground leases from 67 or 65 years to 55 years. Additionally, HCID is requesting authority to reimburse 3 projects that have already made annual base rent payments of $10,000 each for a total of $30,000 from the Low and Moderate Income Housing Fund. There is no impact to the general fund with the request to reimburse developers and to amend the terms of 6 of the projects. The HCID estimates that for 4 of the subject projects, these projects would have sufficient cash flow to make a total of $1.4 million in residual receipts payments to the general fund from years 7 through 15 years after the projects are complete. For one of the projects, Hollywood Arts Collective, approximately $47,000 would be due to the Special Parking Revenue Fund for the loss of 8 parking spots. The department indicates, however, that eliminating residual receipts payments as part of the ground lease would allow the projects to have additional cash flow to repay Proposition HHH, home federal loans, or other city loans provided toward the development of these projects. Our office concurs with HCID's recommendations as amended to reflect the number of projects not yet in negotiations based on additional information provided subsequent to the release of the report. And now I will read our recommendations into the record. And they are that the council, subject to the approval of the mayor, 1, note and file the Housing and Community Investment Department transmittal dated January 4th, 2021, relative to the revision of ground lease terms for city-owned parcels being developed for affordable housing. 2, authorize the general manager of the HCID or designee to A, amend the ground lease terms for 9 city-owned properties that have been released for the development of affordable housing. The new ground lease terms reduce the annual base rent from $10,000 per year to $1 per year, eliminate residual receipts rent due to the city, and change the length of the initial term of the ground lease to 55 years to be consistent with state regulations. B, negotiate and execute ground leases with affordable housing developers for 3 city-owned properties with terms that differ from the previously approved key terms and conditions. Specifically, the new terms reduce the annual base rent from $10,000 per year to $1 per year, eliminate the residual receipts rent due to the city, and change the length of the initial term of the ground lease to 55 years to be consistent with state regulations. And C, prepare controller instructions and make any necessary technical adjustments consistent with the mayor and council actions on this matter, subject to the approval of the CAO. And 3, authorize the controller to use funds for the Low and Moderate Income Housing Fund to refund a total of $30,000 in collected base ground lease payments, or $10,000 each, for the following lessees: Metamorphosis on Foothill LP, Gramercy Place LP and 11681 Foothill LP, or the Summit View project. That concludes my presentation. I am available for questions along with colleagues from the Housing and Community Investment Department.
Are there questions for the presenter?
I was just curious.
We have a motion.
Yeah, could I ask a question?
Please.
I was just curious why the lease agreements were only for 55 years for affordable housing projects. Is that why is there that limitation on them? And does that impact the planning of the project in any way?
Good afternoon. My name is Rick Tonthat. I'm with the Land Development Group at HSID, here to answer questions. And to answer that first question, our lease is actually closer. It's a 99-year lease. But
Okay.
The initial first term is 55 years. So following that initial term, as long as the project maintains its affordability, there's 4 extension periods. So it's a total of 99 years. And the reason why we do 55 years is to align with the affordability covenants, which typically run about 55 years.
Okay, and just one follow-up question. I know that the issue of covenants expiring is something that Councilmember Cedillo has been talking about and other council members have been talking about. I don't know whether this is a place to ask this question, but I was just curious about whether we can encourage covenants to be longer or, indefinite, and whether this is the point in the process to try and think through a change like that.
We do have a group within the department called the Preservation Group, and their focus is mainly on preserving affordability covenants.
Okay, but for this particular one, it would still be a limited covenant for these projects that's emerging, right?
Well, that's correct. It's a 55-year initial term. So long as their affordability maintains, the ground lease will be extended. But in terms of extending the actual covenant, I believe that's where our preservation group will come into play when those covenants expire.
I guess the question is just why deal with it when they expire, because that's a problem that we're facing right now. Why not just think about those questions in advance and have them be longer covenants? Because right now we're facing the expiration of a huge number of covenants that were put into place about 50 years ago.
Correct.
And it's taking away thousands of units of stock, of affordable housing stock from the city. So I guess as we're building more and covenanting more, could we not plan for that by adding more years to those covenants right away so that we're not in the same position in 50 years?
I understand. Our covenants are aligned with typically state covenants as well. The industry is typically 55 years. Our loans also extend for a period of 55 years. So our covenants also run along with our loan terms that typically come with these projects. But to answer your question, whether or not we should extend that, I think that's a bigger discussion than I'm ready to have at this moment.
If I may chime in, good afternoon, committee members. This is Claudia Monterrosa, Policy Director at HSID. And as you may be aware, the city is currently undergoing through the housing element process, and this issue actually has been raised several times. So it's one of the areas of work that we will be looking along with several potential new programs that will be added to the housing element. And, as my colleague Rick has stated, we are subject to state law. And so that's something else that we can also explore, which is expanding or changing state law to be able to allow projects to extend their affordability terms. The state has actually done lots of these changes in the recent decades, but the current term is 55 years, and that has recently been updated to 55 years. So those are two potential options that we can consider as a policy and legislative matter for the city, and we will be engaging in that kind of discussion over the next several months.
Okay, great. I appreciate your answers and look forward to engaging with your department on that moving forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Both Claudia and Rick, I appreciate you guys. I think one thing to note, Ms. Rahman and I are introducing a rent freeze that is more triggered around conditions being realized rather than arbitrary dates. These dates are tied in obviously to financing, to have alignments with state law, federal law. There's a lot of pieces here that I admire and respect you guys trying to keep us in alignment with. But I think we need to begin to start thinking about conditions, circumstances, and acts, right? Certain thresholds that are different than just a date or distinct a little bit more than simply the question of financing. Financing is a fiscal strategy to accomplish a goal, but I think the other goals we're looking for are different. And so we're looking for circumstances where the conditions that necessitate this type of affordable housing maybe don't exist, or if they do exist, that we approach that differently so that we can ensure the presence of the sufficient housing for all Angelenos. So that's just an offering to consider that we also look not just at time, but circumstances and conditions.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thanks, guys. Any other questions? Anyone else want to weigh in? Do I hear a motion? We have a motion. I think Ms. Rahman, I was going to say, she moves to adopt the CAO's recommendations.
Okay. Yes, I move to adopt the CAO's recommendations. Thanks.
We have a second. Thank you, Harris Hassan. Moved and seconded. Can we call roll?
Calling the roll to adopt the CAO recommendations for item number 1, Councilmember Cedillo.
Eli?
Councilmember Rahman.
Aye.
Councilmember Harris Dawson.
Yes.
Councilmember Krikorian.
Aye.
And Councilmember Lee.
Aye.
5 ayes. The CAO recommendations are adopted. Item number 2 on our agenda is a motion by O'Farrell and Price relative to restructuring the city loan set up to mature in 2023 with 5169 Hollywood Boulevard LP for the Kingswood Apartments located at 5169 West Hollywood Boulevard.
Okay, we heard public comment on this from some residents advocating that we should move this forward. I don't know if there are any objections, and I would like to move to adopt this motion.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Moved and seconded.
Calling the roll to approve the recommendations in the motion for item number 2. Councilmember Cedillo.
Eli?
Rahman.
Aye.
Harris Dawson.
Yes.
Krikorian.
Aye.
Lee.
Aye.
5 ayes. The recommendations in the motion are approved. Item number 3 is a joint report from the Department of City Planning, the Los Angeles Department of Building and Safety, and the Los Angeles Housing and Community Investment Department in consultation with the Office of the City Attorney relative to the implementation of the Housing Crisis Act of 2019, SB 330. This item was considered by the Planning and Land Use Management Committee on January 21st, 2021, and was approved with amendments.
Thank you. Can we have staff come forward to make their presentation? There's been changes since we first heard this, so it's not redundant, and plus we have a different audience. So if we can please have DCP, HCID, and LADBS come forward, make your presentation. Popcorn and root beer for everybody.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Justin Bilo with the Department of City Planning. I'm going to be joined today by my colleagues over in HCID, Maya Abood, and Building and Safety, Charmy Wen. I'm going to share my screen for a presentation we have for the Housing Committee today. We did go in front of Plum early last year and then to the Housing Committee. I think this is the first time that this committee has received a presentation on SB 330, so we have one for you today. If any council member or member of the public wants to follow along on our presentation, you can find the slides that we're going to be using today under council file numbers 19-0400 and 20-0047. All right, so I'm going to get started. So the purpose of this presentation today is to respond to a motion under Council File 20-0047 and a joint report by Plum and the Housing Committee adopted by City Council that the three departments, in consultation with the Office of the City Attorney, report back on implementation efforts related to SB 330, with a general focus on the unit replacement and occupant protection provisions of the bill. So let me just get started with a brief overview. SB 330 is also called the Housing Crisis Act of 2020. It's a 5-year bill with most of the provisions effective until January 1st, 2025. It incentivizes the production of housing by supplementing the discretionary review process, restricts actions to reduce housing, and protects existing housing and households. Again, like I mentioned, we had a report to Plum in early 2020. Concurrence from Housing and City Council came in September, and a similar presentation was provided to Plum just a couple of weeks ago. Some key figures, in 2020, 222 housing development project applications were filed with the Department of City Planning. That corresponds with approximately 11,092 total units, 10,644 net new units. 250 replacement unit determinations have been issued by housing, with approximately 377 potential protected units. Those figures are a little different than what you see here because the figures you're seeing on the presentation slide only go through October. What I just shared was goes all the way through December. The departments have been directed to respond to a number of specific questions about how certain terms in the bill are defined and how various provisions of the bill are applied. We'll start with the broad qualifiers. What is subject to SB 330? There are generally two qualifications. One is that the project is a housing development project, and the other is that it's discretionary. So I'll first go and describe what a housing development project is. It's basically any one of these four things. It's a residential-only project that creates 2 or more units. It's a mixed-use development with at least 2/3 of the building area dedicated to residential uses, transitional housing, or it's supportive housing. A housing development project is not the development of only one unit, and it's not non-residential development. The second qualifier is that the project, it relates to the project review process. So the second one is that the project is discretionary. In other words, it has an application going to city planning, and it's not a ministerial project that does not require an application. All right, so at this point, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Maya Bood over at HCID to describe some of the consequences of this bifurcated system and some other implementation efforts. Maya, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Justin. As shown on the slide, ministerial projects or by right projects are only subject to the affordable housing replacement requirements if they're using a land use development incentive such as TOC or density bonus, or if beginning in October 2021, they're located on a site identified through the housing element. Ministerial projects are not subject to the right to return provisions under SB 330. There's been some concern about by right projects not being subject to the replacement and right to return provisions, particularly concerns about the impact to displacement. We did a very preliminary analysis of 6 months of permit data, and we found that most of the by right projects that have proposed to demolish multifamily units are located in areas experiencing some displacement pressure and are typically demolishing 2 to 3 units and constructing 2 to 4 units. Due to these concerns, HCID, DBS, and planning have proposed to report back with a more detailed analysis of the buy right trends and the implications for development and displacement before the end of the fiscal year. I'll also note that during the January presentation at Plum, the committee also directed the departments to report back on potential local policies that could extend replacement and right of return requirements to buy right projects. So moving on to the next slide, just to clarify further, the existing replacement and right to return requirements only apply to what are considered protected units. And protected units are defined under SB 330 as units with restricted affordability in the past 5 years, units occupied by lower or very low income households within the past 5 years, units subject to the RSO, units LIST within the past 10 years. And based on guidance from our city attorney, the city only defines protected units as consisting of one or more units, which means that the demolition of a single family home would not trigger replacement requirements or right of return based on our interpretation. Moving on to the next slide, SB 330 provides that any existing tenants be allowed to occupy their units until 6 months prior to the start of construction activities. To enforce this provision, the city will define the start of construction as the first inspection on any construction permit related to the proposed housing development project. HCID will not clear a demolition permit for SB 330 projects until the project has a new construction permit issued by LADBS. And then to further comply with this 6-month rule, HCID will allow all renters in LS buildings to stay in their unit for up to a year if at least one other unit in the building is occupied by a disabled or elderly person. Moving on to the right to return, SB 330 requires that tenants living in protected units be allowed to return to the new development at an affordable cost. As part of the replacement unit determination process, HCID will require and collect notarized letters from tenants and landlords acknowledging the right to return requirements and that the developer or owner agrees to contact the tenant prior to lease up. Current and future developers and owners will be required to maintain the contact information for all tenants who elected to return. During the January Plum meeting, the committee also recommended HCID report back on a plan to create a more comprehensive outreach and education program to ensure that tenants are better able to access relocation benefits, exercise their right to return, and stay in their units prior to 6 months of construction. We also received questions by council members regarding penalties for noncompliance and establishing a private right of action. Additional penalties or procedures would require a local ordinance. SB 330 does not currently provide any specific recourse or a private right of action for developer noncompliance. Again, at the January Plum meeting a couple weeks ago, the committee did ask that the departments report back on specific actions the council could take to provide a local private right of action. Alternatively, the city could work with the state legislature to include language on penalties for noncompliance and private right of action as part of a cleanup bill. HCLA has included a potential SB 330 cleanup bill as one of our legislative priorities for this legislative cycle. So that is another option available. Now I'm going to turn it back over to Justin to talk a little bit about the impact of SB 330 on historic and cultural monument designations.
Thanks a lot, Maya. So SB 330 also affects the city's ability to designate historic cultural monuments. A historic cultural monument nomination submitted after a housing development project application is deemed complete for filing will not be processed for as long as the housing development project application is active and includes a valid approval. And lastly, we'll go on to staffing and resource plans. We'll jump quickly back over to Maya and then back to me. Go ahead, Maya.
Yeah, so we were asked to report back on the staffing implications of SB 330. Because development has slowed down due to COVID and the additional eviction protections, HSID's existing staff levels are currently sufficient for the current volume of work to implement SB 330. However, if development activity increases or if new local or state replacement requirements and tenant protection provisions are established, HSID will need significantly more staff to process applications, or applications may face significant processing delays. For example, if replacement requirements and right to return requirements are extended to by right projects as recommended by Plum, there may be significant staffing implications. Also, as of now, HSID does not have the infrastructure in place necessary to actively monitor and enforce the right to return beyond what we described previously. HSID would need additional resources to carry out further monitoring and enforcement, such as the kind of outreach and education program recommended by Plum during the last January meeting. So I'll turn it over to DBS to talk about their staffing as well.
Hello, hi. So LADBS staff levels are adequate at the moment for SB 330 implementation. We may require additional staffing if metrics show that there are additional plan check requests resulting from the new process requirements for housing development projects. So we're currently at okay levels. I'd like to turn it over to Justin.
Yeah, and LACP staff levels are also adequate to implement SB 230 right now. Staff have been trained on the procedures and requirements of SB 330 and have been implementing its requirements. We have developed implementation tools and procedures to track and monitor housing development projects through our processes, the department's processes, subject to SB 330. And also note that there's also a interagency task force that meets on the SB 330 on a regular basis. Lastly, recommendations. LACP, LADBS, and HSID recommend that the City Council instruct all three departments to collectively report back on development trends before the end of this fiscal year. The report back should include an analysis of the impact of SB 330 on by-right development and trends on the location and typologies of by-right housing development. Plum Committee also provided proposed additional recommendations during their meeting. And that ends our presentation. Thank you very much. We'll take questions. Thanks.
Questions from the committee?
Yeah, I had a question about enforcement, if I could ask about the right to return issue. So we had a right to return element as part of a project that came through our office, but it was like a project that was handed off in the transition, and realized that the only place where people were getting information, renters were able to get information, was through the developers. And this is not a very well formulated question, except to say that I think that seems like a hard place to guarantee that people can get information about the right to return if they're not interested in fulfilling those requirements. So our office is taking some of that work on and making sure that we have it. And I think council offices across the city are doing that work. But I think it would just be helpful to know, for me, whether tenants who have those rights are able to at least call HSID and find information about what their rights are. Like, is that information recorded anywhere at HSID, or is it just right now exclusively residing with the developers?
I'll let Tess talk a little bit about the replacement unit determination process, because there is a mailer that's going to go out to tenants, and then we would be collecting the information on tenants. So if they called, we should have that on record. But Tess, do you want to explain more?
Hello. Sorry.
Here you, Tess.
My camera. Anyway, I'm Tess Kunanen from HSID. My unit is the one in charge of preparing the replacement unit determination. And before we can finalize the determination, a letter will be sent out to the tenants providing their rights to return as far as, and the relocation rights. And then the owner, if there is no tenant, the owner will put the responsibility on the owner to provide these letters to the tenants. And before we can finalize the determination, these tenant letters are sent to the tenants, and it includes information on how long they have the right to enforce this right to return.
So right now, the only way in which HCID is interacting is through that initial letter when the project is first planned.
Correct. Yes.
And then does HCID retain the information about the tenant and their ability to exercise that right? Basically, can the tenant call HCID to know whether they have the ability to enforce that right going forward in the current system?
In the current system, at this point, we're trying to find some mechanism to enforce that right. I don't think we have that in place yet, but we're thinking of putting that on the covenant to make sure that developers are aware that the tenants have the right to return. And also, we're asking for a copy of the lease agreement to make sure we have the names and information of the tenants. And all of this will be on file on our HIMSS database to make sure that once the certificate of occupancy has been issued, our occupancy monitoring or another unit from the department can inform the tenants of their rights.
Okay, great. And you're exploring that right now?
Yes.
Okay.
We're working with the city attorney on the language of the covenant.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
It seems to me that it's the interests of the committee that to facilitate the implementation of this program, that the tenants can rely on HCID as their source of information on these rights as opposed to relying on the developers. And that this could be codified within the framework of the covenants and the agreements, but that the primary source should be maybe with HCID as opposed to the developer. Is that correct, Ms. Rahman?
Yes, I think that's what I was getting at. Thanks for clarifying.
Thank you. Also, let me note that I'm interested in the relocation costs. It seems to me that also that we may want to stand as a trustee. In other words, if there's going to be movement and people are going to be moved out, and they have rights to relocation costs, that maybe the city becomes the trustee of those costs as opposed to the developer, so that we can avoid problems, challenges within that relationship. It seems that the standing of the tenant might stand more firm if they're interfacing with the city as opposed to interfacing with the developer. And this may facilitate right to return or not right to return, depending on the interests of the tenant. So I offer that as direction and for the department.
Yes, but if I may also respond, Mr. Chair, this is an item that has been brought up from the beginning or the onset of SB 230. And so we will be happy to explore the costs and the process. We did initially consider, that process, it would require additional costs, even if it's a contractor and staff to oversee it. So we're happy to further explore that and come back with that in our report.
Right. Thank you. I don't want to be directive on this, but there's an interest, right, that we want to have realized as opposed to trying to be specific. So I guess at the next report back, June maybe? So when we're anticipating
when is the report back scheduled?
Before the end of this fiscal year.
Before the fiscal year.
Okay. But the process is already ongoing, right?
More or less.
The projects are already ongoing, and as soon as our we are already establishing some of those procedures as outlined by Meritus from the Land Use Division and as outlined in the presentation. So we are taking those steps to notify the landlords or the developers of their requirements under SB 330 only projects. So I also wanted to clarify that what we're talking about right now is SB 330 specific projects. So there are density bonus and TOC and RSO. There's a slew of other, triggers that may or may not have the same requirements for SB 330. So, however, we are creating that package of information for developers and landlords when SB 330 is triggered.
And to further clarify, we're joined by Emma Garcia from our rent stabilization team, who deals with the Ellis process, and Ellis's have been paused during COVID. So the number of tenants who are being asked to leave or being Ellised for new development is not being processed at this time.
Okay. But it's being tracked. I trust you're tracking it, right?
Yeah. And Emma, do you want to join and give clarification?
Sure. Because there is currently a protection for tenants on no-fault evictions, including Ellis withdrawals, there actually are no tenants being evicted in the city. No tenants are getting notices of termination since the start of the local emergency period, which is almost the entire calendar year of 2020. So in terms of protecting those tenants, right now we have a period where we really don't have to address that immediately because there are no evictions taking place for tenants.
I appreciate that, and I think that's a reflection of the wisdom of the moratorium on evictions and the affirmative action that both this committee and the council has taken to keep everybody in place. But I will note, and we've heard anecdotes also from public comment, but also personally note efforts by landlords to evict. Some are not clear on the prohibitions. Some are not clear on this legislation and others. And so some look to maybe a termination of a lease, a termination of a contract or an agreement, believing that that is distinct from the current moratorium. And so I think we need to be sure that we are communicating to the landlord community that there's a firm moratorium in place and that there should not be efforts to influence evictions or influence departures from people's rental housing right now. So we have a motion. Any other questions or comments? So we're prepared to concur with the Plum Committee, but we have some comments we look forward to you incorporating into this as it moves forward. Are we good to go? We're going to report back on fiscal year 2021. The report back will include the impact of by right development and trends on the location and typologies of the by right housing development. Also, please include and incorporate our suggestions about how to make this more effective. Seconded. Thank you, Ms. Rahman, for your second. Thank you, Mr. Harris Dawson, for your motion. Can we call the roll, Madam Clerk?
Calling the roll to approve item number 3 as amended with verbal directions by the chair. Councilmember Cedillo.
Cedillo, aye.
Councilmember Rahman.
Aye.
Councilmember Harris Dawson.
Yes.
Councilmember Krikorian.
Aye.
And Councilmember Lee.
Aye.
5 ayes. This item is approved as amended. There's nothing further on our desk, Mr. Chair.
Would a motion to adjourn be appropriate?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Krikorian. Thank you, Mr. Harris Dawson. This meeting is adjourned. Everybody have a great afternoon.
Bye, everybody.
Continue to serve the
Thank
city.
you.